My name is Stewart, and here in China, I am a history and social studies teacher at an international school. Um, I also run a moderately successful history podcast called the History of China Podcast. And for the past 2 months, I have been sitting inside, watching the clouds go by, and fortunately, being able to work from home.
How was it for
How was it for anybody? for, for me, it was probably about as good as things really got. I had security of home, I had security of supply, I had security of paycheck. Um, so all things considered, it could have been a whole lot worse, and I've definitely heard stories of and seen stories of people who have it a whole lot worse. So I try not to complain too terribly much. That being said, I wouldn't recommend it. 1 star, wouldn't go again.
Do you think that the impression that people in other countries got of what the Shanghai lockdown was like was accurate, or did you have to explain it to your friends abroad?
Yeah, it occurred at a rather awkward time in world affairs, didn't it? It really got overshadowed by the war in Ukraine, other crises all across the world, and it definitely didn't help that the Chinese national government was also doing its level best to kind of underplay things and really talk it down and say it's not that bad, both internally to its own population and externally to the world. It really wanted to keep mum on this, but you can really only keep so mum on 28 million people who are, by and large, really, really tech savvy.
How did you feel about the general approach to communication? Uh, for instance, the lockdown was supposed to last 4 days, right? And then it kind of trickled out. What was your reaction?
Profound disappointment is what I would say. I mean, I realize, and this probably makes me more disappointed, really, which is that it was a city level and then trickling on down to the districts and localities and what have you. And it just seemed like it was a systemic failure to communicate, to effectively, I mean, communication can even be, we don't yet know what's going to happen, we'll let you know as soon as it does. But it wasn't even that. It would just be radio silence until, okay, time to do this. We're going to completely 180 in reverse. And it felt like, they'd roll out these long lists and confusing flow charts of here's what we're going to do and how we're going to roll it out. And then 18 hours later, it would change again. Just, I, I wish I could say that I was surprised. I've been here long enough, though, more than a decade, to not be surprised at something like this. This is kind of pretty typical Chinese bureaucracy, just sort of in crisis mode. And unfortunately, it kind of, you would hope that it would be better, but it wasn't. So, disappointment.
Before all this happened, a lot of pundits would always talk about the competency of the Chinese government. They might not always agree with all the policies, but they would see them implemented and would be somewhat in awe when comparing to other countries. Do you think we're in a new era that people here in China are seeing over also just cooking with water, or what's going on?
Well, that remains to be determined, I guess. I think that it's, for me at least, it's kind of, number one, laid bare the canard of that, the Chinese government that thinks in centuries and decades and what have you. Yeah, right, come on. They couldn't even see the one-child policy demographic collapse coming. And then, but then it also really helped explain to me why, when polls are done across China about trust in government, I would often think, that can't be right. And they're probably, inaccurate anyway, because how can you trust a popularity poll in an autocracy? But it would show that, generally speaking, the populace overall had very low confidence in local government, but very high confidence in national government. And I was like, why in the world would that be? That makes no sense. It makes perfect sense to me now. because Beijing gets to sit way up there and look competent and nicely suited. And meanwhile, it lays out these vague policy directives and says, get the job done. And then it's up to the polities and the localities and even the individual community centers to find some way, somehow, with very little directive or backup or support or anything, to find a way to achieve the directive. Or else they lose their jobs. Or else, something worse happens and they lose their jobs. And that is a real incentive, I believe, and it has been across time, to do more than what the mandate says, to go overboard, to board people up in their rooms, to start putting up plywood and steel grated fencing around people's houses for no particular reason, because it looks good. So, yeah.
You just had an episode on your podcast about Ming Dynasty military commanders troops killing their commanders when they didn't like an order that came down.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go to war. No, I'm much more comfortable here sitting
Yes.
high and dry. How is it right now? Do you see that reflected now, or has the pendulum swung the other way, that everybody follows orders to a T?
Well, I know there's videos out there of different communities, different groups of people who've actually sprung up and resisted what their community center polity has to say, broken out of their lockdown, resisted arrest, those kind of things, and it kind of strikes me as harmonic with the episode that I just put out to that effect, in that those are kind of the soldiers who have said, no, we don't want to do this. This sucks. I don't want to go build that ditch over there. You do it if you want it so badly. And then it comes down to a question of, well, what is the authority going to do about it? And in the show, there's one faction in the Imperial Court that says, just let them go. It's fine. Forgive them, and then they'll stop whining. And then there's another faction that says, no, crack down, drop the hammer. And so it's a real back and forth about that. What we've seen here, at least, is the forgiveness faction winning, where you don't really see a whole lot of hardline crackdowns going on so much. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's been a lot of, I've seen videos of the police saying, all right, you can party in the street tonight, but just keep it down. People are trying to sleep. And it is interesting how that comes down to kind of almost a person-to-person level decision, rather than it being some broad directive from the top.
So you're a historian, so I'd be remiss not to ask you about the future.
Now, that's out of my
Sorry, how
purview.
to do that. No, how do you think this will be remembered? Will this be a seminal event like the fall of the Berlin Wall is being remembered, or 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or something like that? Or will it fade away and just be a minor embarrassment?
I think that really is going to depend, and that's the classic historian answer, isn't it? We'll see. But it's going to depend on if this is a real one-off sea change moment. If the Shanghai lockdown is the big lockdown of 2022 in China, then yeah, I think it will be. If it is just the first of a rolling string of lockdowns, if Shanghai goes into another lockdown, if it just kind of goes on and on and on forever in sort of a quasi maybe we're out, maybe we're in kind of situation, then yeah, maybe it will just become something more akin to fading into the background of events that happened. In terms of the makeup of the city, though, especially the foreign makeup of the city, I think this is going to have a really lasting and historical impact of probably draining this city of a lot of its international color and flavor, such as it is. I know a lot of people who've left already. I know a lot of people who aren't planning to leave in the nearish future. And there's certainly not a whole lot of influx of new foreigners coming in, and I don't foresee that happening again for quite a while, both in terms of the lockdown here specifically, and also in terms of general international events between China and much of the rest of the world. It's not making itself too many friends these days. Yeah, and that's a sad thing, I think. I don't think that that's going to be forgotten.
How about yourself? Has this experience changed your own plans, or what are they?
I'm still on contract for at least another year, so I'm I'm buckled in. I'm in the ride, so for another go round at least. But this has certainly soured me more than I was already sour. Um, China's been changing, and I would say in a retrograde way for a while. It's been kind of moving out of what I think a lot of the world thought it was going into in the 90s and early 2000s, just kind of opening up, being kind of more international and welcoming. Uh, the slogan of the 2008 Olympics was "Welcome to Beijing. Beijing welcomes you." Um, Not so much anymore. It's been a real eye-opening process. Now that being said, am I boarding the next flight out of here? No, I've been here for something like 13 years. That's the almost the totality of my adult life. To just pack up and leave is more than just packing a bag. Um, so it's something that I've been thinking more about, though, considering my options in the next year or so and what that would mean. But it's regrettable that it's even come to me thinking that hard about it.
Yeah, because Vienna is still a fascinating, interesting place.
Absolutely, uh, endlessly so. Uh, I've only, I mean, in terms of my travels, I've gone here and there, but there's still dozens of places, most of the South really, that I've not even been to. I'm much more of a northern traveler, I suppose. But yeah, you could you could be here as long as you want, and there'd still be an endless number of things to go and see that you've never seen before.
So, given that you couldn't indulge in hobbies like travel or something like that, what did you do during the lockdown?
Well, I wish I could say I was really hard at work on my show, writing new episodes. I found that really difficult, actually. Um, that's just both in terms of I don't usually work like that from home. I'll usually go out and find a place to. So it was just a real stressful situation. What I did do was, of course, I taught my classes, which at least ate up a decent chunk of the day. Um, Caught up on a lot of TV shows. Um, and then doom scrolled on Twitter a lot. Mostly just whatever I could do to keep my mind off of the crushing boredom of it all. Played Uno with a kid and the wife.
Did your mood change during the lockdown, like from the early days when you thought it was 4 days to later, or what was it like?
Definitely. In the days leading up to it, we got about a 4-day notice. It was sort of an emergency situation. All right, we got to do this, we got to do that, and then we'll get all this done. We'll get through it. It's gonna be 4 days. Bingo, bango, bongo, out of it. But as time went on and as it dragged on, and again, as the messaging was so crap, it just became what I've likened to a siege mentality. Of you just feel like you're just huddled in your little room, waiting for whatever the next bomb is to drop, waiting for maybe the next food package will arrive, maybe it won't. Who knows? Who knows what'll be in it? Maybe it'll be spam. Maybe it'll be tomatoes. Who knows? And it just becomes this very sullen passivity, kind of a passive aggressiveness in a way. I don't have control of my life anymore, but I don't have to like it. I'm gonna do what you tell me, but I'm gonna grumble about it. Because what else is there to do?
What did you guys do for food? What was the food situation?
We were never in any position of hunger. We had, like I said, we had that 4-day notification, as many here on the west side did. And so we spent every day we could going to the supermarket, because deliveries were basically impossible by that point. Getting whatever we could, because it was a zoo out there and everything was gone by about 4 p.m. every day. Did you get any eggs? Nope, there were no eggs left. How about milk? Well, there was boxed milk. But we'd gotten pretty much all we needed in terms of essentials. The only thing we should have gotten more of was probably bottled water. That never turned out to be a problem, although it almost did at one point, where the building manager, who would usually be in charge of selling us the bottled water, was like, "This is our last one, guys, so I don't know what you're going to do after that." Turned out we were able to get into the group buys, and that worked it. Now we've got like 10 boxes of water in our house, so it's all good. We'll use it eventually.
Did you interact with your neighbors? Did it change how people interact here?
In terms of this community, yeah, and very positively. I probably talked more with people here in the last couple of months than I had in the last several years, all things considered. It's just a real feeling of, in a very significant sense, we're kind of all in the same boat here. And we've all got to go down to get tested. We've all got to go here and there and buy things together and what have you. And in the case of my building, for instance, we were one of the last buildings to open up because we had several late cases crop up in our building. And so just about everybody else was able to come down into this park area and walk around. And we're all just sitting there staring out the window like, oh God, that could be me. But even that is kind of a sense of unity. So that was kind of a positive, I suppose, in a certain sense.
Do you know anybody who had to go to Fangzhou to quarantine or the stores?
I didn't personally know anyone who did. I know of people, like in my building, who did. They may still be there, I don't know. Tough to say. But fortunately, no, I didn't get that happening in my life directly.
Has there ever been a historic event in China that you felt reminded during this lockdown of? That you would draw parallels to?
Well, the most immediate callback is kind of the ancient, or even not so ancient, city sieges. Where, you look at a movie with a siege in it, and it's all wham bam, the orcs are using their ladders to crawl over the walls kind of stuff. But in actuality, city sieges, a lot of the time, they were just drag on boring for weeks, for months, for years. The term itself, siege, comes from the French term, which just means like to sit there. And that's basically all sieges were, which is you have the guys on the inside of the wall sitting there and the guys on the outside of the wall sitting there, and nobody's doing anything. And food scarcity becomes a problem, often for both sides. Medical problems are usually the biggest killer during pre-modern siege, which is, diseases, camp diseases run rampant through the army camps or inside the city and what have you. And that was a fact here as well. People have other medical conditions besides COVID, and a lot of times if they had something acute, they couldn't necessarily get any medication for what they had when they needed it. If they had some real bad condition, like say a heart attack or something, or going into shock for some reason, or even a fall down and cut open an artery accident, the ambulance could be hours, maybe days away in some cases. They might not even let you into the hospital for life-saving surgery in some cases. So I know for a fact people died because of that. And it's just, it's hard to take that into account and just sort of the overall crushing boredom of it all. So that's kind of what I mentally liken it to, and that's kind of how I parallel it in terms of a lot of, and you can, I mean, choose your siege in Chinese history. There's thousands of them. That's why all the cities used to have walls surrounding them, because sieges were just so common.
I'm a little bit hesitant to ask you now who's the orc in this parallel.
Who's the orc? I don't know if I want to answer that.
Yeah, exactly. But what I really want to know is, we've been out for a couple of days now, maybe a week or so. What was the first thing you really looked forward to, and then what was it like doing that?
The first thing that I wanted to do was just get out of the compound and go for a walk. And I went all the way around this big block here, and all the way around, and it was, I'm a big movie buff, so I often compare things to movies. So it was a bit like that kind of opening scene from 28 Days Later, where Cillian Murphy gets out of the hospital and he just sort of is walking around with his deer-eyed stare and just staring at the devastation that was London. And that's kind of how I felt, because the buildings were still boarded up. There were virtually no cars at all on the street. People were just sort of milling about in a daze. There was a testing site near, not in our facility, but outside of it. And I walked by there, and it was just strewn with the packages of the testing detritus. And it just looked like the apocalypse had happened. And then I walked by this KFC, which is technically open, and I see a tent inside. People are living in there. And I'd seen these photographs, I'd seen these pictures, and even these videos, but it was another thing to kind of just see it in person. And over there, that street feeds out from the Middle Ring Road. I don't know if you came off of that, but walking down that way and looking up at it, and it's just empty. I've never seen that street empty in my life. And it's walking down something like, Times Square, and there's not being a car in sight. It's uncanny.
Okay, I don't know what I would do if they would lock Shanghai down again now.
And they might.
Oh, don't bring it up.
Yeah, I know, right?
Don't bring it up. I'm scared now. It was very nice to talk to you. Thank you very much for taking the time. And
Absolutely, my pleasure.
maybe tell people one more time where they can find you.
You can find me wherever fine podcasts are provided. That is the History of China podcast by Chris Stewart.
Thank you.